Here we go. Your calendar already tells a story about you and your family. And I want to ask you, is it telling the story that you want it to tell? So I had a baby during COVID, as many of you probably listening did as well. And we had a pretty intense and wild ride. You can listen to that story. It's in the archives here. But I was coming out of a pretty hard time. My husband was in the hospital for a while. We had had just a wild journey, and we had a newborn on top of that. And so I was heading back to work after being on maternity leave for a year, and things were starting to feel good and better. And I felt like I was ready to go back to work. And I had all the tools up my sleeve. I was a career coach. I was already starting to specialize in working with parents in particular. And I got rocked. I got completely rocked. I went back into work. I had batch cooked. I had good conversations with my husband about how we were going to do this transition and come back into work. And I ended up working around the clock. I ended up not having a lot of time for my family. And I ended up being sat down with my husband, who is a quiet, gentle soul. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're not happy." And I can feel it. And I think Addie, our daughter, can feel it too. And that was such a punch in the gut moment for me of just hearing him say that. He is my biggest cheerleader. Addie, 1 year old, biggest cheerleader for sure. No, she's the biggest fan of the show. But it was just, man, it was so incredibly hard to hear. And when I stepped back for a second and I started to pull out the tools that I use with my clients and that I know I can use and lean on, I started to realize that looking at my calendar, looking at where I was spending my energy and my intention, I wasn't spending my life in the way that really reflected my values and my family's values. And that is love, adventure, fun, freedom, flexibility. These are some of the things that I really deeply value. And when I looked at my calendar and when I looked at the work I was doing, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. And so in this episode, I want to encourage you to look at your calendar in the literal sense, like your actual calendar, the shared calendar you probably have with a partner, and the calendar, the schedule of reflecting on how you spend your time. And are you spending your time in a way that really reflects your values, your own personal values, the values that you have with a partner, if that may be the case, and the values that you have as a family as well? If someone audited your week right now, I know this can be confronting, but if someone audited your week right now, what do you think that your schedule and where you spend your time and energy, what do you think it would say about you? If this person didn't know you at all, and they looked at your calendar and they looked at where you were spending your time and energy and thought calories, what do you think it would say about you? And that's what I want you to reflect on first. So first, we're going to talk about just auditing your time. Take a really non-judgmental approach. That's the hardest part of this exercise, is just remove all judgment possible. Think of it as being an external party, as if you were your best friend who was, auditing your calendar. They would be doing with a lot more grace than you will do it for yourself. So we're going to talk about auditing your time, your calendar, your energy, and where you're spending that. And then we're going to talk about the most important thing, which is, what do you actually want? And that could be a whole other topic. I have a lot of podcast episodes on that topic of how do you really assess what you want in this life, in your parenting journey, in your career. And then we're going to talk about how the hell do you go and get it? Like, how do you actually go out and make those tweaks and make those changes, whether they're really small micro changes that you could do today after listening to this episode, or whether it's a big change that you're going to start to put the energy and time into so that you can be paying off in dividends, a few years down the line. I'm going to use two examples as we meander through this episode. And so the first example I'm going to give you is the person, this is probably pretty relatable for a lot of you, but this is the person who is feeling really run down and frankly pissed off about the fact that they are constantly driving their kids around. Like, they just feel like they are spending, if this is you, you're spending all your time driving your kids from activity to activity. And the second example we're going to do is we're going to use my example of going back to work after maternity leave. And so I wanted to show you two examples of how this might look, how you might move through this process based on where you're at currently. And so let's get into it. So number one, auditing where you're at. sounds very simple. All you have to do is look at your calendar. You kind of see what were the meetings that I had, what was I talking about. That's great, right? But let's just talk about the driving example. So you are driving around, driving your kids constantly from activity to activity, 6 days a week. Maybe you have one day off. You're driving your kids around and you're feeling so incredibly burnt out. Now, it's exhausting. And when you really dig deeper into that, it's not just about the driving, right? What I want you to start to think about is, instead of it just being an audit of like, oh, I don't want to drive anymore. What I want you to do is I really want you to dig deeper and go a couple layers deeper. So is it the driving that you're really upset about? Or is it what the driving is preventing you from getting to do? And so in this case, we'll call her Sally. Sally is just driving around. She's a hockey mom. She's just constantly driving. And she's starting to get really pissed off. And she's like, okay, well, if I look at my calendar, it looks like I value driving, or it really looks like that I value my kids, like being at my kids' every beck and call, and that we're just constantly scheduled and we're super structured. And that's not what we really value. We really value adventure and fun and flexibility, getting to go for a random camping trip on a Thursday night just because. And what I want you to really think about is, instead of just being like, ugh, I hate driving, or I don't value driving, it's not really about that. It's about going a couple layers deeper and thinking, okay, what this is doing is this is actually preventing me from being out in the sunshine, going for a walk, going on adventures, or spending time in an unstructured way as a family. And then in the example of me going back to work. So I was going back to work, and oh my goodness, I could tell you it was so weird being a career coach and going through that experience myself, because I'm so hyper aware of my own thoughts. And I was going back and I started work, and I, like I said, set up all the systems. And I got back to work and I started realizing, holy shit, like I really remember this moment where I was like, this ain't it. This ain't it. Like, and then cue the, oh my gosh, this audit I was doing was so negative. I was saying, I'm just another millennial who wants to jump jobs. I'm a quitter. I'm clearly never satisfied. And I was really telling myself this like story of what was really happening, where I was like, I just don't want to be at this job. Or then I also started to do this thing where I was saying, it's the company, it's the job, it's the role, it's everything and everybody else other than me, when really it was me all along, and in the best way possible. And what I started to realize is and when I asked that question of what's really going on here, it was that I didn't want to be working for somebody else, and I had these huge dreams to work for somebody else, or to work for myself. I didn't want to work for somebody else. I wanted to work for myself. And so this takes us into, what do you really want? So once you're starting to audit things, you're auditing without that judgment. Like I said, you're really looking at what's happening, and you're saying, okay, instead of just saying, I don't want to drive, or I don't want to be working for somebody else, then you really deep dive into, but what is it that I really, truly desire here? So first, you're taking that friction point. You're taking that point where it feels like there's like gears are grinding, and you can really feel that, like, as I'm saying this, maybe something's coming up for you where you're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what that thing is that feels like it's really grinding me right now. And you're taking that as an interesting observation. And then from there, you're going down a layer deeper, again, without judgment. And you're saying, okay, but what do I really want? What is the actual desire here? So in the case of the mom who's driving around, Sally, what her true desire is to have more freedom, more flexibility, to be outside more, and to not be sitting in her car. It wasn't the fact that she hated driving. Maybe she doesn't actually hate driving, but it was the fact that she felt like she was so tied to taking the kids around, and that they didn't have freedom and flexibility because they were all in rep hockey. And then in the case of me being at my corporate job, when I went back to work, it was not that I didn't want to work for somebody else, or it wasn't that I was like against working for the man, or it wasn't that it was the job or the organization. I was making up all these excuses, but really that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Like that's just what was visible to my naked eye. But as I really thought about it and really thought, like, what do I really want? What I really wanted was to create something of my own. I wanted the risk. I wanted the stress. I wanted the time ownership, but it wasn't about like, oh, I just want to, go fuck off and like go to the beach every day with my kids. Yes, I want that. But I also wanted to be working towards something that I was creating. And that is a huge, huge value of mine, is like creating and creative endeavors and building and getting to support people. And I started realizing that my calling was really in supporting parents, especially in their career and parenting journeys, and making that all work. And so that is your step 2. I find that to be the easiest part of it, is really looking at the tip of the iceberg, having to confront what that discomfort is, and then looking at what is it that you really, truly desire. And that's the fun part. So then what the heck do you do next? Okay, now this is actually the fun part. This is when you get into the action and you actually start to decide what is it that you're going to do about this. So you can go a million different ways. If you're in a place where you have zero energy and you're so burnt out and you're just like, I need some quick wins here. This was me a couple times in my parenting journey, for sure. When my husband's health was kind of going all over the place and sideways, like we just needed some quick wins. I'm talking like somebody sent us a DoorDash gift card and that meant the world. And that was such a quick win to be like, you know what? We're getting DoorDash tonight. And that's such a small example, but like it can have a really big impact. Or as I was talking about those gears grinding and something just not quite feeling right, that could be something huge. That could be like you're in a career that you know is not right for you, and you know that the journey to get there might take a bit of time. But I'm telling you right here, right now, I'm looking you in the eye if you're watching this on YouTube or on social, that it is possible for you. It might take a bit of time, but if you just put in the work now, I promise you it's going to pay off. So I had a podcast guest on, now I'm forgetting who it was, but they said, what would you, in a year from now, what would you hope that you started today? And oh my gosh, I was so floored when she said that. And I will make sure I find out who said that and I'll put it in the show description. But it was just that, it was incredible. What a great thing to think about. Like, in a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever that runway is for you, what would you hope that you started today? And so maybe this is the nudge for you to actually just think about, what do you want to start today? So whether it's low-hanging fruit, and we're talking about DoorDash or Uber Eats, or it's some like massive, I want to become the Prime Minister of Canada, yeah, you go, girl, you go. So here's what you're going to do. Doesn't matter what it is. First of all, pick the thing. What is the thing that feels like for you right now, whether it's big or small, is the thing that's coming up for you? And I know that there's something coming to mind, and I want you to just go with it, okay? This is just a thought experiment. And then number 2, I want you to really think about, okay, why is this so hard? Like, why does that one thing feel so hard? What is it about it? And go through that experiment that we talked about, where you can really tap into your wants and your true desires here. And then I want you to ask yourself, this is kind of a hard one. What is this really doing to me? So in the example with my husband, when he said, you don't seem happy, that was everything. That was it for me. It was what was it doing to me? It was hurting my family. It was hurting my husband. It was hurting my daughter. And that punched me in the gut, right? And I want you to also think about, what is this thing? By not addressing this thing, what is this taking away from me, or what is it taking me away from? And that's a confronting one too. So by not doing anything, like if you stayed the same today, through to a year and nothing changes, like what is the risk of that? That's, a coach asked me that one time and I was like, oh, that's a hard one, right? So I really want you to think, like, what is the risk of not doing anything here? And then I want you to kind of get a little tactical. Put your hat on that's like a more analytical type and think, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, what is the level of difficulty, or what are the number of like steps, and like how hard is this going to be to achieve? Because I think what we also need to do is remember that some things are hard, and that's okay. We don't have to shy, like you can do hard things. You don't have to shy away from hard things, but you just have to get honest with yourself about how hard is this? I had a client I've talked about before who was unreal. She was a developer. She was so good at her craft, and she, through our work together, realized and recognized that in her 40s, she wanted to become a lawyer. And so for her, she was like, it was so interesting because I think what she would have said to that question, to answer that question, for me, that would be a 10 out of 10 hardness. Like writing the LSAT again, which I've done before and I don't recommend, or like going through the process of applying to schools and then going into law school and then doing articling, for me, 10 out of 10. For her, she was really academically aligned. She was super passionate about what she wanted to do. I think she probably would have said an 8. So just to say that just because something feels like it could be to somebody else, like 10 out of 10 hardness, for you, it actually might be because you're so motivated, not that hard. So that's a side tangent, but how hard is it going to be? And get clear on that. And then from there, of course, like any project, if you've ever done any sort of project management, party planning, you've got to break it down into smaller steps. And you have to think about what's the first step here that I need to tackle. And as part of your first step, you really do need to think about, who do I need to enroll? And so for me, when I was leaving my corporate job, or if you're leaving being a stay-at-home parent and you want to go back into the corporate world, in any sort of transition, there's often people that we need to enroll, whether it's a mentor for some advice, whether it's somebody to give you a great reference, whether it's your partner to talk about, okay, how are we going to tackle childcare now? I used to be the primary childcare caregiver, and now we're going to need somebody to sort that out. Who's going to pick up the kids? Or in the, other context of, I was leaving my corporate job and I still did need the childcare that we had. And we had to talk about some financial things that were tricky and complicated. I was going from this salary that was very stable to wanting to pursue my own crazy entrepreneurial endeavors. And so that had to be a conversation. As independent, fiercely independent as I am, we had to chat about that. And so who do you need to enroll? And what are the next small steps that you can tackle in order to figure out how you're going to make this change? And so this is always what it comes down to, no matter what topic I'm talking about. Like right now, we're talking about calendars and we're talking about what it says about you and your values. And I'm talking about some really big examples here of leaving your job. But if you're looking at your calendar and you're realizing, wow, we have way too many plans on the schedule, you're allowed to say that feels really hard to change. And that actually could feel really hard to change because that requires enrolling your partner, but it also requires enrolling your children who have feelings and probably big feelings about the activities that they do. And what I would say to that, because if we're on that topic and if I was coaching you right now, I would say, okay, but what is the runway? What's the reasonable runway that you could take and journey on to make this change? And you might actually say, okay, you know what? In a year from now, I'd love it if each kid picked one activity that they were so passionate about and enrolled them in that decision. If they're old enough, I mean, my 2 and 4-year-old would be like, huh? But if you enroll them and they're old enough to say, listen, the reason why we want you to each pick one activity is because as a family, we want to be able to just go on a whim and get our camper van or whatever it is you've got and go for an overnight camping trip. Or we want to be able to just have fun and just have a bit more freedom, flexibility. If you want to have a night to just chill, veg out and watch TV, cool. If we want to go for a stand-up paddle, great. As a family, we really value adventure. And that's why we're doing this. And so I hope you can start to see that these things are possible. Sometimes there's a bigger runway that's required, but if you are then looking at your calendar and you're enrolling your family and you're really thinking about your values, then you'll be looking at that calendar in a year from now and you'll be saying, wow, I drive my kids to these 2 activities, but the rest of the time we are living our values of adventure and exploration and flexibility. And I think when you are happier and you feel like you're really living out your values and you're instilling the values in your family that are really positive and healthy, and you feel lit up, your partner feels lit up, your kids will feel lit up from that. They're going to look back. They might grumble that they can't play like the t-ball that they didn't actually really like, but their friends were on the team. But later on, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, A, they're probably not going to remember that. And B, what they're going to remember is the values and how they felt when you guys were on those adventures, when you decided to pack up in the camper van on a Thursday night and just go for it, go down to wherever. How fun does that sound? And like I said, these are some really big examples that I'm giving, but this is such an important thing to constantly be thinking about. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this is not something that you just do once, you set it and forget it. My kids are 2 and 4 right now, and we don't have a lot of activities. But I know that in a couple of years, there's going to be decisions that are going to be made around things like this. Or work context might change. Currently, my husband and I are actually both self-employed. We're both contractors, but who knows? Maybe he'll get a full-time job that he'd like to, pursue. And maybe the conversation will have to continue changing. And we're going to have to continue doing this process of auditing our time, our schedule, and how our values are aligning with that. And then we're going to have to really think about, what is it that we truly want and desire? And then, okay, what are some steps to kind of rejig and reformulate things? When our daughter was really little and she was, a year old, not even a year old, I think when she was kind of in those like really early days, my husband and I were actually having probably weekly conversations, and we call them recalibration sessions, where we would actually talk about how things were going and what we could optimize or change. And that is totally what I think you can and should do when it comes to this as well. And I think I hooked you in here by talking about the fact that your calendar says a lot about who you are and who your family is. But what I think you're probably starting to realize is, though, the calendar is just the tip of the iceberg. Everything comes down to who you are in your heart. And if you are living out your values in the work that you do, in the way that you parent, in the way that you show up. And I don't want you to have that situation where somebody sits you down and says, you seem miserable and it's affecting the rest of us. And so I implore you to go and just have a think about what is lighting up in your gut right now as I speak to you in your ears, or if you're watching this on video. And I want you to think about, what is that one thing that you could explore, and take yourself through this process. Listen to this episode again. What is that one thing that you feel like would have a pretty big ripple effect on not only yourself, but on your family? So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, the episode notes will be in the show notes. Head over to the blog to see all of the tips and tricks. I don't need you to have to write down all your notes and everything like that. So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.